And they ended up winning.
Yeah, 6-7, despite being down a player at the end.
Did the mascot get away with the gold?
Oh, absolutely. The party was so caught up in winning the tournament that they weren't even watching. And that's how I ended up creating an intramural sports league for my D&D campaign.
When what the party really meant when they requested groups and activities to engage with in town was actually factions. Hey! I'm your host, Sarah, and
I'm your other host, Morgan.
We're two sisters
by marriage
who love to talk about stories.
From looking for exciting ways to enhance our own campaigns
to feeling faction frenzy with Tabletop Journeys' new Kickstarter.
We're Out of Initiative.
In this episode of Out of Initiative, we're chatting with our friends from Tabletop Journeys about their new Kickstarter campaign, The Traveler's Guide to Factions. Welcome. We're so excited you guys are back on the show.
Yay!
We are so excited to be here. Thank you very much. Thank you for backing our last campaign, and thank you for having us on to go ahead and talk about our next one.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It is so awesome to be with you, share a screen with you once again. It is a highlight of our times behind the mic is when we get to get together and talk. So this is going to be a lot of fun.
For sure.
We're just excited to have you guys on screen. You guys get your screen time now, and I think that's what you need.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
Don't
I don't know.
video, yeah.
Screen time? I'll be all right. I can do this. I had thrown in a, hey, I'm glad to be here too, but I was muted. My bad.
Oh. Well,
I applaud your mic
we'll
discipline.
Do just a visual gag of you, like, pantomiming, and I'll subtitle it. It'll be perfect.
There you go.
And Glen's trapped in a box. Yeah, it's okay.
So, you guys previously had a Kickstarter campaign that was quite successful.
It was awesome.
Yeah,
it was pretty great.
What made you guys decide to do another one? What about it did you enjoy? Like, that kind of thing.
Oof.
Yeah, it seems like a big undertaking. Like, it seems intimidating, honestly. So I need to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Josh, if I can start this one, and I will hand off to you very quickly.
Yeah.
So it is a big undertaking. It is a lot. There's a lot of things you have to pay attention to. And if you're doing your due diligence, you are asking so many questions of so many people to get the right do's, don'ts, tips, techniques. But at the same time, you're still bringing it back to your team to actually figure out a plan that feels good, and warm and fuzzy to you and your team, because at the end of the day, nobody else's experience is your experience. Your experience is always your experience. So when we went through that whole process, we found the things that we really liked, the things that gave us some struggles along the way. We were successful despite that, and we kind of really had a good idea of what it would take to take what we do to the next level. And we've done a lot over the past year to kind of get practice at some of those things and put out and roll out some of those things in other avenues, other venues with other products that we've put together. And we are raring to go. We've really got, I think we have our finger on the pulse. I'll let Josh talk about a lot of the picky details and specifics, because he really shepherds most of that part of the ship.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, it really comes down to, we always wanted to keep doing this thing. We learned what we needed to learn, and now we're going to do it better.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is that's very well said, actually. That's we structured that first campaign specifically to go ahead and kind of learn how to do campaigns, right? We wanted to take something fairly low risk and wound up producing an almost 200-page book in the process, and learned a lot about kind of how to structure these campaigns in a way that felt good to us. Kind of those content-centered stretch goals, for one, that like the more people that back, the bigger the book gets and everything like that. We thought that was a really, really cool way to do it. But yeah, like it's Kickstarters are no joke, man. That's a job that starts 6 months before you hit the button to start it. When you're gathering artists and you're gathering sample art and you're trying to decide what the heck you're going to write and everything like that, it's kind of like it's a lot like podcasting, actually, right? It's like, everyone thinks, oh, we'll just do a podcast and it's really super easy. It'll be great. And then when you start, you're like, holy crap, this is so much work and it's so amazing. Doing Kickstarter campaigns is almost exactly the same thing. Like, it's like, oh, let's just do a Kickstarter. And it's like, oh no. Oh God, what have we signed up for? So, but it's just a ton of fun. Yeah. We're really looking forward to this next book.
And in short, our need to create content far outweighs our fear of the work of Kickstarter.
Yeah.
I love that.
The
I love that.
TTRPG equivalent of opening a bar. Like, we should open a bar. Like, wait, you guys, we should open a bar. Like,
You should.
Yeah.
And then you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's amazing.
Right. How hard would that be? Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
You realize you need bounce.
Or we should run a convention.
oh yeah.
No.
Yes.
Yeah.
I could see
Back
us
up slowly.
I could see us doing that.
Back up slowly, Lewanika. No.
Lewanika
They've
has
been
trying
telling
to
me
go ahead
this
and get
for
us
3
to
years.
Participate
Yeah.
in a
for
convention,
3 years,
yes. Run a convention, no.
You know
I
what? You
do
got a pair
not
of
have
type
that
A's
kind
over
of time.
here. We're on your
yeah.
team, man. We
Right.
are on your team for this one.
I'm just saying, everyone I go to, I'm taking notes. I'm just saying. It may not be this year. It probably won't be next year. But everyone I go to, I take some notes. I'm getting
I
better
own
at it.
walkie-talkies, and I am prepared to put my earpiece in and back you up. Like, let's roll.
Breaker
Yeah.
19, this is Rubber Ducky, and I got you.
I will happily
The
go to
eagle
your
has left the
convention when
building.
after you run it. Yeah. Exactly. So,
And Josh is over here pouring
Yeah.
rain on it. He's like, hey, negative Ghost Rider, the pattern is full.
negative.
I'm not sure
Yeah.
there was anything even close to as classy as an eagle in the building in the first place.
Yeah.
So as
factions.
far as factions goes, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Why did you pick that to be your main focus for this particular Kickstarter? Yeah.
So
I
I won't
I
speak
think-
for all of us, but I'll start.
Okay.
Let me start on this one, Lewanika, because I have some ideas.
Yeah.
I think the first thing was that we were in the thick of writing our last book when the OGL kerfluffle at the beginning of the year happened. Like, to the point that we were like, oh crap, what does this mean about us putting out our book? How are things changing, and how are they going to impact our ability to actually get this thing out to the 100 people that backed our campaign, right? And I think that what we learned from that in particular was that going with something that was portable to other systems was going to be really important. Even if we're writing a book that has D&D rules attached to it, something that people can take and bring into a futuristic campaign or a steampunk campaign or any other kind of setting was going to help this book live a little bit more securely than it would have otherwise. And so when we started kind of crafting this together, that's why we started targeting factions. And when you started looking through the faction documents, you saw we have plans there to go ahead and kind of address the wide spectrum of time periods. We're trying not to aim strictly for something fantasy based, but we're trying to go ahead and say, how can this live and breathe in like a post-apocalyptic world? How can it exist in like a near future world, like something like Shadowrun or Cyberpunk, stuff like that, and that was really kind of like the guiding philosophy behind putting these together. And even also too, kind of like touching other systems too, right? Like if you look through like the stretch goals, like we've got Tales of the Valiant stuff in there. We're looking at stuff that's going to be coming out for Pathfinder, stuff like that too, to go ahead and see how can we work other systems into the rules, so it's not strictly D&D 5e. That's kind of our bread and butter still, as far as like a rule system, and it's so marketable, but we also want to go ahead and be building out a broader base.
For sure. Yeah.
Smart.
Yeah, from a narrative standpoint, a lot of it was we weren't sure where that was all going. So all of that is absolutely correct. One of the things that I thought about while we were writing is every so often we'd write a bit of lore, we'd write a piece, and it didn't quite fit the subclasses, or a subclass really informed a larger group beyond the individual. So on one level, it was our first book was about things you can see. Our last book, our first Kickstarter, was about the people you can be, and this is about the people you can meet or be a part of. And that's really the narrative evolution of what we've put together. And ideas that we had in our very first book that didn't quite fit that got pushed into the second one. Some of those ideas didn't quite fit there or needed more room to breathe, needed a little more je ne sais quoi oomph. and they've got moved into this project. And with very few exceptions, most of what we started with 3 years ago has landed in this book and has found its home. There are still a couple ideas that, as we've worked on this for months now, they're actually going to spin off and be their own individual project. So there's more than just this book in Tabletop Journeys future, but this is the landing spot for a lot of ideas that we've been working on, talking about, having conversations on different podcasts, and certainly White Room theory crafting throughout our podcast and intermixed through a lot of our storyteller and player episodes and just the things we learned. We did all those class features and class rankings that really informed our subclass book. We've been doing a lot of talk about how to craft adventures, how to deal with NPCs, when to use them, all of that in this past 6 months or so. A lot of that was bringing a lot of the ideas. So if people want an idea of where we're going with this, you can really just go back into our catalog of episodes to some extent, and you will have a really good lean into where we're headed. You won't have all the bells and whistles, but you're certainly going to know, you're going to have a sense of where this sheet music is going to take you.
Right. And I mean, very well said, Lewanika, and you kind of covered all of the bases there, but pretty much what it boils down to is it's going to be like an upside down pyramid where it's an endless string because creativity begets creativity. So everything we're working on, the stories we develop wind up being complex, but the scope of the book is narrow. We don't throw all the rest of that away. That's becoming our next projects. And when we did a lot of the backgrounds and Traveler's Guide to the Multiverse, exactly like Lewanika was saying, that's what really started shaping the direction of some of our thoughts as we headed towards Factions eventually 2 books later.
Yeah, that's awesome.
You've got one non-content huge difference in my mind as a consumer between book 1 and what we've got for the Factions book, which is that you've chosen to do a print copy, a print edition, hardcover. Oh my gosh, what a big undertaking.
Yeah.
What prompted that decision? I'm so stoked, by the way, to see that on my shelf.
Same.
Yeah.
Like it's gonna go like right there.
Well, so that's why we're doing it, right? It's because we're also stoked to see it on our shelves. That's kind of the dirty little secret is that after this is going to be our 4th book. The previous 3 books, like we've printed privately, or at least I have, and Lewanika's had a couple. And Glen, I know you're on the road now, so I'm not sure if you ever had.
Yeah, I don't do a whole lot of print copies anymore, but I love the copy you sent me of what you printed.
Yeah, but it's like, no, the coolest thing ever is seeing one of your books on your own shelf with your name on it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And
so, that amazing cover that Glen put together. That's so gorgeous.
Right? That was book number 2.
I love that.
And it's like, well, I love, and like I back a lot of Kickstarters myself, and I am absolutely like a kid in a candy store when I see a Kickstarter that offers a physical copy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want the physical copy. I want to be able to hold it. I want to be able to touch it. I want to be able to put it in my fancy cabinet and never read it again after reading through it the first time, all that sort of stuff that comes with reading a book. And so we're like, well, we've been doing this for a while. We kind of figured out some stuff about like doing layout and all that sort of stuff. So let's take the next plunge and do it. And, that's probably the scariest part of this entire endeavor because, doing physical copies on a Kickstarter is not so much anymore because a lot of like the global supply chain issues have sort of worked themselves out, but it's still like, okay, we first have to make the PDF and then it's another 3 or 4 months before people are going to get books. And like, we just need to understand that as the content creators. Yeah, it's a little scary too, because the other thing is that like if one person buys the physical copy, like we're probably losing money on that, right? Because like as you get physical copies printed, they get cheaper the more you print, right? So like if one person buys it, okay, fine. And if 100 people buy it, we have a total other problem, right? At that point. So it's it's kind of, it's a good problem to have, but it's also a different problem. So
honestly, I was initially, we didn't talk about this when we did our second book. It really wasn't a factor when we were planning the second book. It did come up into conversation as we were getting ready to fulfill the second book. Like, how would that work if? That's where those conversations started. But for me personally, when it hit home, how cool that would be is we wrote the adventure, one of the two adventures that appears in the Dragonlance Companion through Splinterverse Media. Had a blast doing that, and I ordered
Mhm.
the print version of that on DM's
And
Guild.
learned a lot working
Yeah,
with Jimmy too.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a platinum selling product right there. We're not the 100% the only people in there, but we at Tabletop Journeys can legitimately say we are part of a platinum selling team on DM's Guild, and we're very proud of that fact. But that book, when it came in and I peeled it out of its bubble wrap and out of that manila envelope and scolded my carrier for leaving it on the back steps out in the rain, but the packaging was so good that the book was protected.
It's like a Hemingway novel. Jeez,
Yeah, but when I open that up and I'm like, my name's on a hardcover D&D book.
yeah.
Like, I had previous to that, we've done our PDF stuff. Previous to Tabletop Journeys forming, I had some consulting credits on another drive-through RPG product for Starfinder, and I really like seeing my name in print. I'm gonna say that for what it is. I like it.
Yeah.
I
Heck
like it a
yeah.
lot, and
Yeah.
on some level, part of it is a family thing for me. So many people in my family write and are authors, mostly in the political arena, and but some in healthcare and behavioral health type issues. And so there's all of these family members that have physical copies of their books. Like my dad has done pictures on YouTube where you see his library and he can point to the books that he's authored and stuff, like including poetry that he did in college at Cornell University. And I'm like, yeah, when I get to be 75, I need to be pointing that out too. I will walk with a cane. I will crack really funny jokes, and I will be pointing out to all my grandkids on Zoom meetings. Well, this is the book I wrote when, so I'm
That
looking forward
that
to
all
that,
makes us
and
sound horribly vain. Like that's
It's
it,
not
that all makes us
though.
sound
I
horrible.
think
Like
you
we're
put
just
in
like getting
so
printed books because we want
much
to see our name on
work.
it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Well,
you
and
put
the
in
other thing too
so
is
much
we're starting to do a
work.
lot of
Yeah.
conventions. Sorry,
It's
go
okay
ahead.
to be proud.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
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 So,
Yeah.
in regards to that, when you guys were preparing this book and
Yeah.
were researching either factions or just working on it, what were some like interesting things you discovered or anything surprising? Kind of where you drew your sources or just in discussions? Yeah. Who wants to go
Glenn, why
first?
don't you start this one? Yeah.
So one of the, I mean, I can straight up give you one of the sources because it's one of the ones I enjoyed the most.
Sure.
But it'll take me a second because I'd have to actually look it up because I don't remember it now. So I'm not going to give you the source. Let's back up out of that. I think one of the biggest surprises that I found as I was really starting to dive into factions and looking into the research that we've done, because we pulled from everything from the Adventure League for D&D's Guide to Factions to a book called Remarkable Factions and something, and that's
Yep.
the one I can't remember, but I'll get you the information before we're done here. I'll find you that information.
So you're
But
talking about the Lore Smith book, Remarkable Cults and Their Followers,
that's the one.
which is a great book. It's an amazing book.
Thank you,
Repeat that
Josh.
again, Josh, one more time.
Sure. Yeah, so it's a book by Lore Smith. It was called Remarkable Cults and Their Followers.
Okay.
And it was something that I got on Kickstarter before Lore Smith unfortunately closed down last year. But
Thank you very much, Josh, for filling that in for me. Sorry I didn't have that up front. But what surprised me the absolute most is how much each faction that you create truly is like a little micro society, down to the point of having its own culture and some maybe even its own superstitions or traditions. I mean, they're not just, or they shouldn't be just, like Kirby vacuum salesman with just a big chart up on the wall where they list their members and who sold the most or who killed the most undead this year. They should have life. They should have passion. They should have people. So when you have that many people, those interactions create the complexity of a whole society. And trying to imagine, because I mean, we're covering a lot of bases with the types of factions that we're doing. We didn't just want to do all good guys, and we didn't want to just do all bad guys. So then stopping and trying to imagine what a group of undead hunters, like the Guardians of the Grave, one of the factions that'll be in the book, and how they would look at not just the world, but how they interact with each other. What kind of, they're obviously not a cheery lot, so what kind of traditions are they going to come up with? They're probably not going to have colorful musical ceremonies, but, and just trying to go down those different rabbit holes of what would these people be like, and then trying to bring it to life on the page. That's been the most challenging, surprising, and rewarding part of it so far.
Yeah. I think for me, my favorite part was sort of, because I mean, when you put together a book like this, the first thing that you do is you write twice as much content as is going to go in there, and then the
Yeah.
three of us kind of get together and be like, okay, that one's crap, but that one's pretty good, so we're going to keep that one, right?
We try not to say that one's crap. We try
Right.
not to.
Yeah, we try not to, but
We use
it inevitably happens.
constructive, positive language.
Well,
that
and
is
what was kind of
royal feces.
There you go. That's the one.
So,
Yeah.
I like
for
that.
this
Nice.
one, I
I
thought
need
was-
to write that down somewhere.
Yeah.
Sorry, Josh, we're all interrupting. You are bad.
No, it's fine. Yeah, so but for me, I think what was most surprising about kind of like that cut down process for this time around was not because like when we did the subclasses, there was definitely a lot more like, no, this is not good. We really need to rethink this, right? But for this time around, it was a lot more like, you know what? I love that concept. It's not good for this book, but we should make that its own game. That's like that's a different system, different game altogether. Or, ooh, man, you know what, Lewanika, you wrote so much information on this thing. It's almost a product unto its own. So let's do that. Like, let's not let's not put that in here because it kind of doesn't fit. You would have to do a lot of like cutting and pasting and a lot of like kind of surgery to kind of make it fit into this, but we can definitely farm that out into its own thing later, So that was kind of the thing that I think was most surprising is either we're getting really good at this, right? Where it's like, we kind of know like what it is that we want to do as we're writing it, but still writing way too much material. So, that kind of surprised me this time around. So
No, that's 100% true. Josh even got a little bit grumpy because in our cut no cut survey, we said yes to everything. Lewanika and I both, because we liked it all. And he's like, "How are we supposed to cut?"
Yeah. So to be fair,
space for
the question wasn't put them in order of which ones we want them to appear. It was, is this good enough to be in a book? Yes, the book, yes or no. So for me, from my personal perspective, and then 3 days later, I found out I was not the only one who had that perspective. The answer was all of these are good to be in the book.
Right.
And all of them will be really good in the book. But the next question was, let's put them in order of what's going to be the best ones. And it's not like the other ones were not, because some of those ones that were in that upper tier, they're going to be separate products by themselves. So it's not like Tabletop Journeys will not be done with factions here. We think we have a really good winning format. So a lot of our products may introduce more factions down the road, but this is where we start. This is where we're going to give you at a minimum 9 factions to really prime the pump, and we're also going to include a section on how to build your own factions using the Tabletop Journeys methodology. And I'm really excited about that because I think that's one of the things that many games don't do well enough. With a few exceptions, there are some that do a really good job, though it is way numbers heavy and less narrative than I think it should be. GURPS was really good at that. Palladium Games is amazing at that. There's not a Palladium system you can get that doesn't at some point in their 14 billion books that they print say, if you like this mercenary group, here's a way to build mercenaries. And it's all in this really beautiful Palladium system. So whether it's building a squad in Recon, a mercenary army in Rifts, a super spy organization, or a superhero team in Supers, they have a system for that. And so in my head, as we were approaching this, I thought we can't do this by just giving them ours. We have to show them how to make their own, because as great as everything we're going to do, when you understand the system and you can use a couple of ours as quick foils, quick fill-ins, one shots at a convention, awesome. But when a storyteller builds with their players at the table through gameplay, their first faction together, and visits all of these things that we're going to be talking about and builds in those traditions through role play, builds in those traditions. And maybe they just play the campaign. The next campaign is 30 years later, and what the party did is now the faction for the new campaign. When they do that, we didn't just light a fire. We lit up the solar system. Like this is that kind of power in the hands of players when they realize that I can impact my campaign world. And
You're taking notes, Morgan, right?
Yeah,
because she's starting a new campaign. You better be taking notes.
She can see me frantically typing in the document. Kirby vacuum
Doing a
salesman,
lot of
kill
world
undead, turn it into a whole faction. I am into that one.
Absolutely,
awesome.
And I should add,
such a bad idea.
I should add, for both of the two or three times that I have sold Kirby vacuum cleaners in my life, and the probably 30,
every one of them would be dressed as Shaun of the Dead, too.
Yeah, 30, of course. For the 30 or so demonstrations I've done and the 3 that I've actually sold, one each time I was a Kirby vacuum cleaner salesperson, I can honestly tell you nobody was truly harmed in all of that except for one bruised knee by me when I was packing it in the car at the end of the day. But that notwithstanding, it's just going to be so much fun. People are going to have so much to work with.
So you said you're up to 9 factions so far. Is that right?
Yeah.
8 or 9? So what is your metric?
There'll be 9 factions in the book.
It'll be 9 total.
Okay. So what was your metric? You said you had all these ideas. What was a bar you held them to and said this one's we're keeping or this one we're not? Like, how did that work?
So the funny part is that that criteria actually kind of got abandoned after we decided the 9 of them. Amazing. Which is kind of funny, right? We kind of because when you're reading through them, the first thing we was like, well, okay, so this is sort of like an ally faction. This is I can see patrons or aligned NPCs, sidekicks. I can see them sort of coming from this faction because I can see them being aligned with the player goal. So this is a good faction, not an evil faction, right?
Okay.
And then there were factions on the other side of the spectrum, right? Where it's well, these really aren't people that you would want aligned with your party. So, they're kind of on the other side of the spectrum. And then we're kind of well, this is a faction that could go either way. And so that was kind of how we started. We kind of put them into all those buckets. We're well, if we take 3 from each, that kind of spreads out the writing load and it kind of spreads out the game balance a little bit and everything like that. And then I think it was probably by our second cut down meeting, we're wait a minute, we don't want to pigeonhole people into saying, well, the Guardians of the Grave, they're only bad people, right? We, if people want to play them. So we kind of abandoned that structure. Yeah, exactly. They're all shades of gray, and they're going to include how to play them, how to make them NPCs, how to make them foes, all that kind of stuff. They have role playing tips for playing them both sides. But by that point the cut down was already done. So it kind of was it's we had the criteria to start, but it kind of went away after. So yeah.
9 is
makes sense. Yeah.
9 is a great number, and
sure.
like Josh said, it really comes down to we decided
there's 3 writers.
Yeah, there's 3 writers. There's 9 factions,
Mm-hmm.
but it was
next up was 12, and that was going to be too many pages.
Yeah.
Right.
So when those decisions were made, then it was, let's not be prescriptive, but let's make sure we give people the notes and tips and techniques to do what they will. So those buckets still exist, but as opposed to making any one thing one of them, now all 9 can be all of them. And it really depends on the game that you're running at the table. We're all about empowerment here at Tabletop Journeys.
There's at least a couple that you'd have trouble turning into quote unquote good factions, but you can at least get somewhere into the middle shades of gray with them.
Well, tomato.
So how about so what was your favorite? Yeah, what if what was your favorite as you were reading through? Which ones sparked joy in you?
Understanding you've only gotten elevator pitches so far, but
exactly
right.
Yeah.
You don't have huge amounts of detail.
The Ember one, the Artificer.
Ember Weavers?
Yes.
The Ember Weavers. Yes.
I was reading that. I was that would seem so universal. As you were saying, in the different timelines and different fantasy worlds. I could definitely see a character being a member of that. It seems
so thank you, first of all. That was mine. So but that was very much one that I was okay, I can picture them in like today or like near future or future state, right? Where it's like, these are the people that are crafting starships, or these are the people that are crafting, you know, like these are the people that work for Raytheon. These are the people, you know, kind of like that kind of thing, right? In a modern day sense. And it's like, okay, so now if you kind of extract that level of like high-end technology, if you extract that back into a fantasy setting, kind of playing on the concept that that the line between technology and magic is a matter of faith, you know, kind of thing.
Sure.
You know, so kind of extracting that back, it's like, okay, well, what would the extreme technologists of today, what would have their, if you transported them back into a fantasy setting, how would that be, how would that look, and everything like that, you know? And so that was very much kind of how that faction came about, is like, what's a modern day thing, and then how do I make it fantastic, or how do I make it add some imagination to it? So
yeah, that was the one that just really stuck out with me, that I could see implementing in my own games, that kind of thing. Yeah.
I'd like to know what your favorites are. Like,
Oh, man.
are your own your favorites, or did you find that as you finished writing?
So
Someone else, where you're like, that's the one I should have wrote.
I too really like the Ember Weavers, but since we've already taken some time to talk about, I'm gonna let that one go for the moment. Great job on that. One of them is actually working out to be a nice combination, because we all worked on our ideas kind of in separate, and then we pulled them together. So part of my home campaign world that I run, the Land of 18 Seas, part of Glen's campaign world, uh, the Boiling Seas, has this great sea naval tradition kind of element to it. And we both ended up writing factions that had that strong element. And as we looked at them when we got to our first cut meeting, we're like, these could go together really nicely and form something that's really special. So I really like the fact that it was two separate ideas that worked really well together, that kind of are merging to form a great thing. And then I guess the personal one that I'm very high on at this moment is the Outriders, because they are very steeped in Roman military lore, as far as where their origins are and where they come from. That's not where they end up. That's not what they are necessarily within the game, but it starts with that tradition. And it's about scouts. It's a specific job within an army and an organization that formed out of that, formed with great expertise in that area. And that is also something that can be extrapolated out through time, and they in any scenario or setting. But I did a lot of research, mostly YouTube, a little bit of hard book research as well. But on the way Roman scouts are formed, trained, the way the scouts in the Roman armies began, where they were in the middle part of the Roman Empire and where they were at the decline of the Roman Empire, and how that worked out. A lot of the names, not all of them are final, so I won't go into them specifically, but a lot of the names that you see in the preliminary documents that you lovely ladies have been able to get a peek at, are definitely legitimately the exact name for the exact thing in historical Roman armies. And I love historical research. Josh played in a game with me, I think 15, 20 years ago now, where we were playing Northmen, Vikings of a sort. And I decided I was going to play the Bard, but I wasn't satisfied with just playing a Bard. I actually went out and bought the Icelanders, which is a book about yay thick. So your audience is on video will definitely see it's a pretty thick book, and it is the epic poetry of the North peoples and the Icelanders as they moved from their original homelands, their trials and tribulations from that period all the way to Greenland and then onto the New World. So it's like this multi century epic of a series of specific families, because it was largely centered on a couple different families and all of their lore and the way they spoke, the way their traditions. And so as the bard for the party, I just read that book, and then I just read that in, like the way that the leader of the party, because he was the chieftain was announced, I would just go and announce him, and I would read all of his titles and epithets in that true fashion. I love that part of the game. And so I did it with the Icelanders, and so this is my way to do that within our book. The way for us to give the Tabletop Journeys audience a way to see how I play the game.
Sure.
That's what I love about that faction. This is the way
Yeah.
I lock into a character and play a character. I go all in and deep.
I love that. I was super excited to see the Outriders. Our D&D group is in the middle of planning our next kind of major campaign, like world. We're doing like a Dawn of Worlds, build the world together collaboratively, all this world building. And then my husband and I, Sarah's brother is my husband, and I have been kind of building this huge world and kind of getting everybody's input on it. And we have he is this huge Roman inspired empire, and as soon as I started reading about the Outriders, I was like, oh, this is going to be such a fun fit for him to like kind of reference and pull from. I think it's just like such a nice natural fit with the direction he already wanted to go. So I was like, oh, I already know one
Awesome.
GM who's going to be thrilled to read this when it comes out.
Excellent. And it is why we do this. Like, I think for each of us, forgive me guys if I'm speaking for you, and jump in and tell me if I'm wrong on this. We play the game in very specific ways. We love this game in a very specific way, tabletop gaming, and our approach is really writing the things that we wish was already there. And since it's not, if not us, then who? And that's kind of what we're putting on paper here today.
Yeah. So what about you, Glenn? Which one was
so? Picking a favorite's a tough thing to do.
I'm sure.
I'm gonna go with, and this is one that I wrote, but it started actually in one of my campaigns with a character, an NPC that I created named Augustus Cater, who showed up to resurrect my son when I killed him in his very first game with me.
I feel like that's
right. So he was
the best.
I decided at that point that he was an Aasimar following a patron isn't the right word for the Aasimar, but diva, following a diva who had a plan for the future. And his job was to right wrongs to make sure that future came into existence. Right?
Wow.
So my son's character was important to that future, so he had to be resurrected. And later they met him on a battlefield randomly, years later, and he's out there just with his hand outstretched, and he picks somebody and resurrects them. You know, that's where the Hands of Providence was born. And the Hands of Providence is like a conclave. There could be more than one. Like, you could have multiple societies like this, because it's a conclave of fortune tellers, or people with foresight, and sages and seers who have a collective vision of the future that they all believe in, or serve a patron whose vision they believe in, and they travel the world just nudging events in different directions to make their future come to pass. You could actually have two higher powers that each have their own agents on the world, and they could be in conflict. So you could actually have like two groups of Hands of Providence trying to influence the same set of events. And sometimes they could be seen as heroes, you know, if they save the town because it was foretold that it should be saved. But other times they could be the villains.
Yeah, that seems like a good one that could lean either way in your campaign if you want them.
If the town being wiped out is destined, well, they're going to help wipe out the town.
Yeah, that'd be a really like flexible back and forth one.
Glenn, as you described that here, we've had a lot of talks about this group, and I've always thought they were cool. I literally just got this modern day game where you have two.
Yeah, it could fit any genre.
Yeah, where you've got two competing Illuminati and a party of folks that are just kind of caught in the middle, just trying to get through it and make things right. Like, it could be who's going to make sure the astronaut gets on the ship to rip from Picard a little bit, or who's going to make sure that there's a problem with a political problem, so they cut funding, so there is not going to be a launch or whatever. Right. And you could literally have these two different groups doing these two different things, and the party kind of navigating between them, trying to get things done.
I'm getting huge like Good Omen vibes. From what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like, that's,
Good Omen was in there a little bit, but honestly, Person of Interest, if you've ever watched the
Yes.
show.
Oh,
Yes.
The Agents of the Machine versus the Agents of Samaritan is how I relate it in a modern setting.
Yep.
Yep.
Perfect. And I love that show so much. So much.
So there were a lot of things that influenced it, but it was born from that one need of, oh crap, I just killed my kid. I can't let him stay dead. So outside the cave, there's a guy. He just showed up because he was sent there, and it all worked out.
And I should add, when he says he killed his kid, he meant he killed his kid's character in game.
Yes. My son's character in the game is the one that passed from this life.
Thank
No
you.
children were
Yes.
actually harmed in the
We
making
need
of
that
this.
specific.
Yeah, it
Sound
was either
bites.
that or
Actually
you have
harmed.
a very weird puppet in the next room.
Right. So no, we're just gonna
Those
go
are not
with that my
exclusive
son's
terms.
character. Thank you for the clarification.
I'm here to
So-
serve.
Nope.
Josh, you said the Ember Weavers.
Yeah.
Was there any
Yeah,
others? you want to
I mean
touch on?
the warp and the weft. So the warp and the weft is a
That one jumped
that
out to me
name I think
too.
we're still kind of kicking around.
That word,
Okay.
that name is a work in progress.
But
Okay.
the story,
I
the
kinda like
stories
it.
of Gran the Hag have been kind of a running theme through a lot of our products for a while, stemming back to some of the first stuff that we put up on DM's Guild many moons ago. And so and man, there's something about hags that are just amazing and disgusting. Like when the Ravenloft book came out, it had those rules for hags and the little
Yeah.
the little trinkets, like how she could throw a fingernail in your belt pouch and be able to track your position, like stuff like that. That's just
Oh,
so
yeah.
creepy and disgusting.
Yes.
So when Glen resurrected Gran, and instead of just making her like creepy and disturbing by herself, also gave her this entire cadre of followers to do her machinations, I was like, oh, that is so good.
Yeah.
It's so right and proper that Gran has just like blind followers that don't even know who they're in service to. Like it's just like yeah, it was perfect. I love that one.
Oh
Before
man,
I-
you've been doing such a good job.
Getting-
I've been like, I honestly feel like I'm just watching a really good show.
It's just amazing.
I keep
Because-
forgetting.
Because you
Can we
are.
Can we
great.
get a quick? You have some really awesome stretch goals.
Yeah.
Could you real quickly go over those, just so our listeners can know what else is out there?
So I'll take the first one and then you guys can go off from there.
Whew,
So
let me find it in here then.
So the big thing that we're kind of stretching ourselves for this book is art. We had the benefit of kind of using some custom art for the last book. It was a really great process, and it really kind of added something really special to the. Like I see, Sarah, you're wearing the T-shirt with Morgan Winters art on the front, right?
Yeah.
So that process really added a lot to the book and really kind of spun our wheels thinking. So when we were drawing up kind of the plan for this book and the budget for this book, we said, you know what we should really do? We should double down on the art that we want to go ahead and put in this book. And somehow doubling down on it meant taking the budget that we had for art for the first book and multiplying it by 5 for this book, because we really want some really great art in this book, which of course it factors into the goal and everything like that, but it also, from like kind of a budgeting point of view, like there's going to be some custom art that's in kind of the initial offering if we don't hit any stretch goals, but our very first stretch goal is going to be a sizable amount of additional budget for art. And what we're going to get with that is kind of like individual character portraits for the individual factions. So, not just kind of like
nice.
not just kind of like sigils and heraldry, which is kind of the base offering, but then also like, what does an Ember Weaver look like? What does someone from the Warp and the Weft look like? That kind of thing.
Good.
So that's really something that we're really interested in getting. So I really hope that we get there. That's a really big focus for us in this book, is kind of custom individual art for this project. So
that's a really fun balance, because art, obviously, it can be really expensive, and that's a really fun way for you to like allow that budget to flex. If it's important to us, then we can we can put a little more behind it. That's really cool.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah, we've thought a lot about kind of how to structure the budget on this one. That was, I think last time we just kind of like, we'll pick a number out of a hat and let it run. So. And then Lewanika, I'll let you go for backgrounds, because I know like that they're kind of your thing.
That's my thing. So following that is backgrounds and feats. Like I think it was our second or third. It might have been our first full episode after our intro mini episode was about backgrounds, and it's critical to us. I believe characters start with backgrounds. To some extent, if your character's coming from a faction, some of that is there. So to me, having some unique backgrounds that that are tabletop creations that really fit well with each of these factions. You don't have to have them, but if you wanted to have a character that was part of a faction that fit really well, or if you wanted a character whose parents may have been part of one of these, you might have one of these backgrounds. And so you don't have to be part of this organization, but you still want some of that flavor. We wanted to create that ability. And
I
with
like that. Yeah.
that's kind of where I think backgrounds can do a lot of heavy lifting on the narrative end of things. It's less about mechanics at this stage. It is more about what can I put on paper to help me role play and keep the core of this character in my mind as I go to the table. What can I bring in? And again, because we're going to teach DMs and storytellers, teach is probably a strong word for it, but we're going to give some ideas to storytellers on how to do some of this stuff themselves. They're going to see how that forms, and maybe they're not going to go and build a whole faction on their own, but maybe they might build a couple backgrounds that speak to some faction that they already have, because there are some great factions on official products and many products that are out there maybe, but they don't sing. And so if somebody can build a good background to help make it sing, now you're cooking with Sterno.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sterno, yes.
it's a Cub Scout, Boy Scout thing. I've
I
been
was gonna
saying
say
it for
I found the
years.
camper. I found the Boy Scout.
Yeah. There's a couple of us on this one, but yeah.
Yeah, Lewanika and I were in Scouts together since we
Yeah.
met
That's
when we were like
right. Oh,
in
that's
Scouts
right.
at
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
11 and 12, or 12 and 13, one of the two. He's a year
Yeah.
older than me, Nana.
I'm the other one that wasn't a scout. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I guess, like I said, mentioned earlier in the show, one of the other things that I'm really proud about with this book, or at least in the plan for this book, is that we're going outside of kind of strictly D&D 5e, right? We've got a stretch goal on here that's specifically going to target Tales of the Valiant, with their combination of lineages and heritages. That is something that we have talked about D&D missing pretty much since the show began, right?
Yep.
Is the whole concept of the lineages and the heritages.
Yep.
And so, because not just kind of like in conjunction with your background, like not just what are the things that you've experienced, but where do you come from? If you're an elf that lives with dwarves, how does that affect what you're doing? That kind of thing, right? And so we're excited to kind of like see how, kind of what the final version of that from Tales of the Valiant is going to look like, but also excited to kind of see like how can we make those rules work in kind of this set. So like, you're not just going to have the backgrounds as an option, but kind of like dividing the background in half into the lineages and heritage too, kind of see what weird combinations you can come up with. So.
Yep. Being able to port those mechanics from a strict 5e WotC branded style or WotC styled game, and being able to do that in that other avenue, Tales of the Valiant, is really, really strong. And the timing of this project and the timing of our fulfillment will give us plenty of time based on what we know of the Tales of the Valiant release schedule to be able to do so and not miss our fulfillment goals. So we're really proud about that. And like I said, this book doesn't just stop here. Depending on what goes on for future products that we do, depending on when we see Pathfinder's full offerings later on, there's nothing that says we can't revisit our older works and start offering either as add-ons or stretch goals for these other things for future products, where we can't say, okay, we now have a Pathfinder port of this previous book. So now all of the mechanics or all of the stat blocks from a previous book, the last book, we've got the Pathfinder 2 version of that now. Those are things that we're really looking forward to being able to provide that change. Like, and I envision a far-flung future where we're going to have a PBTA version. We're going to have a SWAD version, Savage Worlds version, where we can do these kinds of things. So this is our first foray into that. This is our preview of the future. This is our ability to follow that path forward.
And all of those are like way future state once we have those rules and have the ability to work with them. But in terms of our current stretch goals, we've also got 3 named NPCs and stat blocks per faction is one of the stretch goals. Now, each faction will already come with at general like minion or follower stat blocks for each tier,
Oh,
and
nice.
each faction will also, and 5e is the system that we have to work with that because it's
Yeah.
also the most compatible with the most game systems. And each will also have one featured NPC, whether it's the head of the faction, the face of the faction, something that represents them. But if we reach one of our stretch goals, we'll be adding 3 additional named NPCs that are part of the faction to kind of help you bring it more to life. That'll be fully developed and have, backstory and stat blocks, etc.
And that would be per
Is Gran-
faction.
Yes, per faction.
Is
Yeah,
Gran
so it's
Gran
a
going to
bunch.
get a stat block? This is what I need to know.
My intention is to stat Gran as the leader of the Warp
like
and the
it.
Weft as it comes
I'm
out.
so excited about that.
Yeah,
I
so
mean, I haven't figured out how because she's ancient. Like, she claims to be the first hag.
Yeah.
She's evolved past traditional hag trickery and kind of adapted that timeless perspective of a lich or a vampire. Still twisted, but and she should be a lot of fun to create. Yes.
I have to admit, whenever I picture Gran, the picture that I have in my mind is I'm trying to think which chat program it was, but it had this grandma that had maracas that she would shake. I think it was like Teams or Skype or something. It was this little like cartoon grandma that had maracas. That's what I picture. And like
Nice.
typical like gray gray permed
Mhm.
hair and like a purple sweater and a green skirt, and like just like she would shake her little maracas. That's what I picture every time you say Gran is that little grandmother icon from Skype. I can't,
See, and
I'm
I
just
picture
picturing-
a little old
Really
a little old poofy haired like Midwestern woman who always talks to everybody super polite, no matter what she's saying, even if she's talking about, oh yeah, and then later I'm gonna have to boil your gizzards in oil because you did this thing to me, and I'm really sorry about it, but about it.
But they'll be
I don't do
delicious, yes.
Midwestern very well.
Yeah.
You're actually kind of you're dialing in on the woman from Baldur's Gate, who I think your player knows like right away. You're like, something's up here.
Yeah.
Well, we're currently running Curse of Strahd, and every
Right.
old woman
Is a
the
hag.
party meets assumes
hag.
it's a hag.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Hagnaciousness is a real thing, even if the word is not.
Should be.
Hagnaciousness. Yes,
I thought you
Josh.
only created words on our show.
I create words wherever I go. That's
So,
what I do.
Yeah, he's a wordsmith. It doesn't mean poet. It means he just makes the shit up.
Yeah,
really. Exactly. Yeah. And I think the other thing that we are really excited for is, again, because we love telling stories, right? So the adventure starters portion of the last book was so successful and so good. In fact, we haven't even really said this out loud, but we're actually carving just the adventure portion of the heroic subclasses book into its own book that's going to be on itch soon, as soon as I finish doing the layout. Because like the adventures, like they're so portable and they're so good, and we really like the concept of like here's 10 or 12 pages where it has a handful of kind of encounters or adventures that you can go on, and then like a page of questions, like, okay, you've made it to this thing, where do you want to take this? How can, and here are some ways that it can influence like kind of the rest of your campaign. That's why we call them adventure starters. So we're also really excited to go ahead and potentially hit that one for this one too, because we think we got a really good format and we liked the way that the flow worked on those in the last book.
To
And
give
so
you
we're
just
hoping...
enough information without overdoing it, and leave you plenty of room to build on your own, but not leave it just a bare bone skeleton.
Yeah,
exactly right. Yeah, so we're really looking forward to go ahead and hit that one too. So
sorry, Josh, for interrupting you.
No, that's perfect time to interrupt.
And one of our bigger stretch goals, and it's one of those ones that when we say stretch goals, we mean tippy toes and fingertips. Stretch goal is adding maps of the layouts for each of the factions. Inspiration can come in a lot of different ways, and visual is one of those ways. A lot of people do continue to play digitally, and we assume they still will. It is, however, an additional art cost, so we had to make some decisions as to what's going to be core to the project, what's going to be stretch goals, and when they're going to be. But we have been in conversations with a few really well-known map makers out there in the Patreon world. We don't have anything locked in on paper yet, so I can't go too much into detail as to who, but we definitely pick people that are in our style wheel so to speak, and for what we're looking for. And with that stretch goal, if we are able to hit that, we're going to have a map for each of these, and it should be a layout, a layer or fortress or something core to that faction. So our players could actually have their big set piece tent pole combat at the end of a campaign in the actual fortress of a given faction, or and what have you. So I think that excites me to be able to cap our offerings with something like that.
Amazing. So, real quick, when is your launch date? Where can people find you as we wrap up? Yeah.
Sure. So the Kickstarter goes live on September 28th. It's going to run for most of October, closing on the 24th of October. So about almost 3 weeks, or a little over 3 weeks rather. And the best place right now, so we don't even have the preview link. We're recording this so early, we don't even have the preview link yet. But if you subscribe to the Tabletop Journeys podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, that's the best way to go ahead and hear news. Or you can just go to ttjourneys.com/Kickstarter. And there's a form there where you can go ahead and drop your email address, and we will make sure and let you know when we go live.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us. This has been great. I'm so excited.
Oh, so much fun. It was awesome to see you all again. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For anybody interested in this project or previous projects, because we did talk about how this product, this book, this great system we're putting together here started with some of our previous works. And so if you're interested in some of those origins, you can always find us on the DMs Guild. Most of those products are there. On the DMs Guild, just search for Tabletop Journeys. We will pop up. You can also go to our itch page. Once that's finished, we'll have that information on the Tabletop Journeys website, and some of those products will be available. So it's not exclusive to just the backers of that original product. We'll have those things, those available, or portions of those available for folks moving forward as well.
Awesome. Great.
Well, Tabletop Journeys, Glen, Josh, Lewanika, thank you so much for joining us. We have been Out of Initiative, but we're going to get back into it. So get out there, roll some dice, tell some stories, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Out of Initiative, a podcast from Merely NPCs. For more from Sarah and Morgan, follow them on TikTok at Merely NPCs, or visit them online at merelynpcs.com.